Okay, so this video is going to review the literature review section. So for this section, you are to use the readings you have collected from the research proposal from assignment 2 and the annotated bibliography, which is assignment 3. You have 8 sources to work with. You are to organize your readings according to the fundamental principles of writing mechanics, logic, coherence, and comprehension. You are to inform your reader of your object of study and the argument that you are providing. For the literature review, you are to integrate your data and write an informative essay. And you could use statistics, direct quotes, or clearly paraphrasing by identifying the author's ideas. You could use graphs and relevant images. As I mentioned before, I'll show you how to do this in class, meaning how to incorporate an image into your paper if you decide to go this route. And I also have a YouTube tutorial showing you how to go about doing that as well. All right, and just like what I mentioned earlier, do not include these points, meaning what I'm highlighting currently. These are not to be included in your essay. They're just there to guide you, just like the rest of the outline for this paper. Okay. So I'm just going to go over this section, and just like with the other portions of the YouTube tutorial, I'm going to show you my example as well. Okay. So the first thing that you're going to do when you write the opening paragraph for the introduction, at least for this particular paper, I'm going to identify the position that I'm taking regarding my particular topic. All right. Just to sort of give everyone a general idea, if you pick pro globalization, you're saying that you are in favor of globalization. In terms of how how has spread democracy, given opportunities to women that were once closed to women, in that sort. Okay. Now, oh, and I forgot. And then the other thing about globalization when it was first introduced to the general public in the 1990s was that it was considered a very progressive system and that it would solve some of the issues from the 20th century. It would solve some of the issues or social problems that lingered in the 20th century by globalization. Okay. So that's pro globalization. Now, critical of globalization would be adopting a position saying that despite the promises that what globalization has made initially, globalization up to this point has failed to actually fulfill that promise. Okay. And especially like with my globalization course, I've, I've sort of explained how um, that the first 23 years of the 21st century is pretty much the same as the last 50 years or so of the 20th century, if that makes any sense. Okay. So that's for critical globalization. And then lamenting globalization would be, at least the example that I provided for the globalization course is like when I was growing up, there was a concept of working for like one or two employers, and that was considered, and that was considered lifetime employment, where you work for like one or two employers over the course of your working career. Okay. So like that's what that means. Okay. Now, for adopting or what theoretical approach you're adopting, you could adopt either a hyperglobalist, a skeptic, or transformationalist theoretical perspective. All right. So just to sort of remind everyone, hyperglobalists believe that globalization is real and that the main factor that moves globalization is capitalism itself. And you can sort of see this reflected within the language of researchers that adopt this position, where they'll categorize globalization as global capitalism per William I. Robinson, or liquid capitalism, and I think it's Bauman who argues that point, or casino capitalism by Sin. Okay. So like that's what that term means. I mean, sorry, for the hyperglobalists. And then the skeptic position on globalization is that for them globalization is not real, right? And that it's comprised more of regional economies and multilateral economic agreements like NAFTA, the European Union, ASEAN, or the African Union. And sorry, and ASEAN is the Asian regional markets. Okay. And one of the arguments that a skeptic would make is that the difference between the historical development of like manufacturing capitalism or financial capitalism is the magnitude, meaning that uh, when money is being transferred or products back then during the late 19th century, you're talking about maybe um, a couple of $100,000 to maybe $1 million or so. But in today's world, you're talking about maybe tens of millions or hundreds of millions to billions of dollars. So that is what is meant by magnitude. And the frequency, for example, would also mean that there are many more transactions that are done like within an hour compared to maybe like a month, like in the 19th century. Okay, so like that's the skeptic's position. All right, and then finally, the transformationalist position are a group of researchers who would argue that globalization is real, but um, that globalization is an entirely new system that has never been seen by humans before. So this would comprise a new understanding, new structure, and new processes. Okay. So you'll notice also in terms of the nuanced differences between a hyperglobalist and a transformationalist. Okay. So that's also the important thing to understand. Now I'm going to go to point three. So you're going to explain what your argument you are making in your essay. All right. So like pretty much what I'm going to argue, like in the example that I'm using, is how human trafficking is a violation of human rights, and how the interconnect or the connectivity through travel has actually facilitated human trafficking at a greater level today than when the slave trade was actually in full swing up until the mid of the 19th century. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. And then lastly, you're going to identify any concepts that you're going to use in your essay. And as I mentioned in class, the best way to go about doing this would be to just identify one of the concepts from your annotated bibliographic references that you use for assignment three. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. And then also, uh, once you write the introductory paragraph, then you're going to be addressing these points here. To assist with the organization of your literature review, you're going to convert your questions from section four, the research questions, into subheadings for the literature review, and then answer the question under each specific subheading using your sources sources you have collected. And just as a reminder, provide specific evidence data to support your claims. All right, and this is sort of what I've may have written on your paper. When you're using a quote from a source that you selected, you have to contextualize what they are saying in relationship to your argument, right, or to the topic that you're discussing. Once you contextualize the reader, or sorry, excuse me, the writer, then you're going to provide the specific quote or provide a paraphrase of the quote, but be very specific and indicating that is a paraphrase of the author's ideas, and then providing interpretation of that paraphrase or direct quote, and making sure that you make that connection of interpretation to your topic and your ideas. And this is how you're able to integrate your sources within the context of your writing, right? Because you want to avoid, as I've written in some of your papers, that you don't want to give the impression that you're writing a fragmented or a multi-theme paper. You're right, because writing a multi-theme paper, or even writing a fractious paper, is not going to aid your reader to understand what you're trying to convey to them. Okay, so like that's paramount in terms of when you're writing, is visualizing what your reader is going to experience in relationship to your writing. Okay, and then lastly, you can incorporate newspaper articles, quotes from songs, describe movies, scenes, or other relevant pieces of information to make your point regarding your object of study. Okay, so let me go to my example so you can see how I constructed uh, section. Okay, so this is what I wrote. So this research will adopt a critical point of view on the topic of how globalization facilitates human trafficking. Human trafficking is a violation of human rights because it deprives a person of the right to be free from any coercion by way of physical violence. This study adopts a critical approach because when globalization was first introduced in the 1990s, globalization was presented as a progressive force for good. Through this lens, it may be apparent that the spread of human trafficking is one of the many effects of globalization that has not fulfilled the promise of making life better, but worse for human trafficking victims. Human trafficking is based on commodifying the human body for profit. As such, this study adopts a hyperglobalist approach. Adopting a hyperglobalist approach assumes that globalization is an actual thing to be studied. The engine that moves globalization is capitalism, which is a system based on the idea of expanding its reach, whereas capitalism can only survive when it is expanding to new markets. Sorry, forgot to add that part. Human trafficking, again, the violation of human rights. Globalization has made shipping victims around the world because of the connectivity that has made it easier for human traffickers to take advantage of a global system of travel. A concept used in this manuscript is connectivity, as Paul James and Manfred B. Steger 2017 explained how connectivity aids in connecting people for economic purposes through modern technologies. Okay, so then that's more or less my introductory paragraph, and then this right here is my subheading from my research questions, which I'm going to show you in a moment. But you notice that my subheading is global connectivity facilitating human trafficking. All right, so like now I'm going to go back to the research section and show you my question. And you'll notice question one reads as how does global connectivity facilitate human trafficking? So you can note that it's a question, correct? All right. And then when you go to the subheading, it no longer reads as a subheading, but reads more as a statement of fact. So when your reader reads the subheading, then the reader is going to understand what topic and what issue and what question you're addressing in the literature review. Okay, so this is what how I went about writing this particular part of the essay. James and Steger explained that connectivity is foundational to understanding globalization. James and Steger briefly explain how the term connectivity has gone through many iterations of how it can be used to understand globalization. For instance, they highlighted John Tomlinson's 1999 definition of complex connectivity. Terms like these tend to revolve around the concept of exchange and interaction at a distance. To James Steger's argument, to clarify and refine the understanding of connectivity related to globalization. Now, so then you'll notice that I'm contextualizing the quote. Also, I'm summarizing the point that James and Steger are making about the idea of connectivity. Okay. And then this is the quote. Thus, an adequate definition of globalization needs to recognize that connectivity is only one possible outcome of increasing extension of social relations across global space and time, even if it is experienced differently from a subjective point of view. James and Steger, 2017, page 23. But you'll notice that because I did not use their name at the beginning of the quote that I used, rather, I used it in the in text citation. This is a proper way of how to quote. Or another way would be if you identify the authors at the beginning of the sentence or the quote that you're going to use from them, then you would just put in parentheses 2017 colon page 23, right? Or you could also provide the quote and then provide a comma and then write according to James and Steger, 2017 page 23, but you would do it like this. Let me just show you very quickly. According to James and Steger. So that's one way how it could look. Or it could look, um, yeah, sorry. Yeah, something like that. Okay. I just don't want to make it more confusing than it needs to be. All right. So now I'm just going to go back to the original format that I had. Okay. All right. Okay, and then going from that quote, to develop an adequate understanding of globalization is to understand how connectivity is crucial for global flows to connect different and disparate areas around the world that used to be isolated prior or before globalization. Right, and then you would continue explaining how that relates back to your topic about, like, at least for this situation of human trafficking. Okay. Um, and then just hypothetically, like if I were to continue writing this out, this particular subheading would be yeah, 2 to 3 pages in length. Okay. And then once you're have written those 2 to 3 pages for that particular subheading, then you're going to do the same thing for the two other questions that you have remaining from your research questions. Okay. So, for example, just to give you an indication of how this would be a subheading. So, the subheading would be community disruption, allowing criminal organizations to select victims of human trafficking. So this would be the subheading for my second subheading, and then the third one would be how human traffickers identifying a victim of human trafficking. Right, or sorry, victim for human trafficking. All right, and again, you would do the same thing, and this would be your third subheading, and then that is going to be your third part of the essay that you're going to be organizing. All right, hopefully that makes sense. If not, make sure that you ask any points of clarification when we meet for our next class. Okay, so now I'm going to stop here, and then I'm going to continue with the significance. Okay.